You know, most people think first contact would be this beautiful, transcendent moment. Maybe some wise alien species would show up with the secrets of the universe, or at least a decent recipe for faster-than-light travel. Instead, Earth got Ambassador Zlothok. Picture this: a 7-foot-tall purple octopus, wearing what can only be described as the galaxy's most pretentious military uniform, complete with medals that probably came from a cosmic cereal box. Zlothok slithered into the United Nations building like he owned the place, leaving a trail of what smelled suspiciously like vanilla behind him. Commander Jake Murphy had been Earth's chief diplomatic liaison for exactly 3 days when this happened. 3 days. He'd literally just finished reading the employee handbook when his assistant burst into his cubicle. "Sir, there's an alien in conference room B demanding to speak with Earth's leadership." Murphy looked up from his coffee. "Is this some kind of elaborate prank? Because if Johnson from accounting hired another stripper for his birthday, I'm filing a complaint." "No sir, definitely alien. Also, he's speaking through what appears to be a mechanical fish." Murphy paused. "A mechanical fish?" "Yes sir, very shiny. Makes dolphin noises between sentences." This was not covered in the handbook. 10 minutes later, Murphy found himself sitting across from Zlothok, who was indeed communicating through a chrome-plated fish that floated 3 feet above the conference table. The fish spoke in a voice that sounded like a game show host having an existential crisis. "Greetings, primitive Earth creatures," the fish announced while Zlothok's tentacles writhed dramatically. "I am Ambassador Zlothok of the Galactic Council, representing 47 star systems and roughly 12 billion sentient beings who have never heard of your pathetic little planet." Murphy nodded thoughtfully. "Well, that's honest. I appreciate the transparency." The fish made a sound like a dolphin having a nervous breakdown. "You will surrender your planet to the Galactic Council within 72 of your Earth hours, or face total annihilation by our mighty fleet." "Total annihilation," Murphy repeated, taking notes. "Got it. And this is because..." Zlothok's tentacles turned a deeper shade of purple. "Your species has been flagged as potentially dangerous to galactic peace and harmony." Murphy glanced around the conference room, which still had last week's birthday decorations hanging from the ceiling. "Us? Dangerous? Have you met us? We can't even agree on pineapple pizza." "Your planet's radio signals have been monitored for decades," the fish continued. "We have observed your tendency toward violence, your primitive weapons, and your disturbing obsession with reality television." "Okay, I'll give you the reality TV thing. That's fair." Zlothok leaned forward, all 7 tentacles spreading wide in what was probably meant to be intimidating. "Surrender now, or we will demonstrate why the Galactic Council has maintained peace for over 1,000 years. Murphy set down his pen and looked directly at the mechanical fish. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You're threatening to blow up the planet that invented nuclear weapons as a science experiment, sent people to the moon just to prove we could, and created the internet primarily for cat videos and arguing about everything." The fish's dolphin sounds became more agitated. "Your primitive weapons are no match for our advanced technology." "Right," Murphy said, pulling out his phone. "I should probably call this in. Fair warning though, our current Secretary of Defense used to be a Marine drill sergeant. She once made a recruit cry just by looking at him funny." As Murphy dialed, he couldn't help but smile. Earth had been wondering when they'd meet their galactic neighbors. Turns out, the neighbors were just as dramatic and unreasonable as humans, but with worse fashion sense. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Stone here. General, we've got a situation. Remember that alien contact protocol we discussed? The one where you said we'd probably have to save the galaxy from itself?" Murphy watched Zlothok's tentacles twitch nervously. "Yeah, that one. Looks like it's showtime." 20 minutes later, Murphy found himself in the Pentagon's Situation Room, which looked exactly like every military bunker you've ever seen in a movie, except with better coffee and a persistent smell of sanitizer. President Martinez sat at the head of the table, looking remarkably calm for someone who'd just been told aliens wanted to blow up Earth. "So let me get this straight," President Martinez said, stirring sugar into her coffee with the same casual attitude she used for budget meetings. "Purple Octopus Man shows up, threatens global annihilation, and gives us 3 days to surrender." 72 hours, Murphy corrected. "And he communicates through a mechanical fish." "Of course he does," General Patricia Stone muttered from across the table. She was exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd climbed the military ranks: steel gray hair, shoulders that could support a small building, and the kind of stare that made seasoned soldiers check their shoelaces. Standard alien intimidation tactics. Probably read it in some galactic manual called How to Threaten Primitive Species for Dummies. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the Pentagon's chief xenobiologist, looked up from her tablet, where she'd been frantically taking notes. "Actually, This is fascinating from an anthropological standpoint. The mechanical fish is likely a translation device, but the choice to make it fish-shaped suggests their species has some cultural connection to aquatic life forms. Elena, Murphy said patiently, they want to vaporize us. Right, yes, the existential threat. But did you notice the vanilla smell? That's probably pheromone-based communication. He was literally broadcasting his emotional state. General Stone leaned back in her chair. What emotion smells like vanilla? Nervousness, actually. Or possibly indigestion, hard to tell without proper equipment. President Martinez raised her hand. People, focus. We have an alien ultimatum to deal with. Options. General Stone cracked her knuckles. Well, we could always show them what a real weapons demonstration looks like. I've got 3 carrier groups that would love some target practice. Patricia, the president sighed, we're not starting an interstellar war on my watch. Why not? We're good at wars. It's like our thing. Dr. Vasquez looked up excitedly. Actually, I have a better idea. What if we don't fight back at all? The room went quiet. Murphy was pretty sure he could hear someone's eye twitching. Explain, President Martinez said carefully. Think about it. They're expecting us to either surrender in terror, or respond with primitive aggression. What if we do neither? What if we thank them? General Stone stared at her. Thank them, for threatening to kill everyone. Exactly. It's so unexpected, it'll completely throw off their psychological profile of humanity. Plus, if I'm right about their bureaucratic structure, a formal thank you note will require an official response, which means committee meetings, which means delays. Murphy felt a grin spreading across his face. You want to defeat an alien invasion with paperwork. Not defeat, confuse. There's a difference. President Martinez drummed her fingers on the table. It's insane enough that it might actually work. Murphy, you're our diplomatic expert. Can you write a thank you note that sounds sincere, but makes them question everything they thought they knew about human psychology? Murphy pulled out his pen. Madam President, I once wrote a performance review that made my supervisor apologize for giving me more responsibilities. I think I can handle one purple octopus. General Stone shook her head. You're all crazy. When this backfires and they show up with bigger ships, don't come crying to me. Patricia, Dr. Vasquez said with a mischievous smile. When was the last time anyone underestimated humans and it worked out well for them? The general considered this. Fair point. All right, we'll try the thank you note, but I'm keeping the carrier groups on standby. Deal, President Martinez said. Murphy, you've got 4 hours to craft the most passive-aggressive thank you note in human history. Make it count. Murphy looked around the room at Earth's leadership. A president who treated alien invasions like budget negotiations. A general who viewed interstellar war as a fun weekend activity, and a scientist who wanted to psychoanalyze their would-be conquerors. Humanity was definitely going to be fine. 4 hours later, Murphy stood in front of Ambassador Zlothuk again, this time with a small entourage that included Dr. Vasquez, who kept taking notes like she was studying a particularly interesting lab specimen. The mechanical fish hovered impatiently above the conference table, making soft dolphin clicks that sounded vaguely irritated. Well? Zlothuk demanded. His tentacles writhing in what Murphy now recognized as the alien equivalent of tapping your foot. Have you prepared your planet's surrender documents? Murphy smiled and pulled out an elegant piece of paper with the official UN letterhead. Actually, we've prepared something even better. A formal response from the people of Earth. He cleared his throat and began to read with the kind of professional tone usually reserved for award ceremonies and funeral eulogies. Dear Ambassador Zlothuk and the esteemed members of the Galactic Council, on behalf of the 7.8 billion humans currently residing on Earth, we would like to express our heartfelt gratitude for your recent communication regarding our planet's immediate surrender and subsequent annihilation. The mechanical fish made a sound like a dolphin having a stroke. Zlothuk's tentacles froze mid-writhe. Murphy continued, his voice growing warmer. We are truly honored that a civilization spanning 47 star systems has taken the time to personally threaten our small insignificant world. It's not every day that a species gets a 72-hour ultimatum delivered by such a distinguished representative. Dr. Vasquez was practically vibrating with excitement, scribbling notes as Zlothuk's purple skin shifted to a confused shade of lavender. Furthermore, Murphy read on, we deeply appreciate the Galactic Council's concern for peace and harmony throughout the universe. As a species that has spent the last few thousand years perfecting the art of creative conflict resolution, we recognize quality work when we see it. The fish's dolphin sounds were getting higher in pitch. This is not how primitive species typically respond to annihilation threats. Oh, we're just getting to the good part, Murphy said cheerfully. He continued reading. We were particularly impressed by your research into our planetary communications. However, we feel obligated to point out a few minor oversights in your intelligence gathering. Zothuk leaned forward, all 7 tentacles twitching nervously. Oversights? Well, for instance, our primitive weapons include devices capable of splitting atoms for fun, chemical compounds that can dissolve most known materials, and delivery systems accurate enough to put a warhead through a window from halfway around the planet. We developed these primarily for recreational purposes. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her notes. Also, we've been intercepting and analyzing your communication signals for the past 6 months. Your fleet's weapons systems run on a crystalline matrix that becomes highly unstable when exposed to certain radio frequencies. Frequencies that coincidentally are identical to our emergency broadcast system. The mechanical fish went completely silent. Zothuk's tentacles turned an alarming shade of pale green. Murphy folded the letter and smiled. But here's the really exciting part. We're so grateful for this opportunity to meet our galactic neighbors that we'd like to make a counter-proposal. Counter-proposal? Zothuk whispered. Earth would like to formally apply for membership in the Galactic Council. The silence in the room was so complete you could hear the air conditioning humming. Dr. Vasquez was grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. You see, Murphy continued conversationally, we've been looking for a good career opportunity, and conflict resolution specialist sounds right up our alley. We have extensive experience in creative problem solving, strategic negotiation, and what we like to call aggressive diplomacy. Zothuk's tentacles were now making small helpless gestures. But you're supposed to be terrified. Primitive species always surrender or attack. They don't thank us and ask for jobs. Murphy shrugged. What can I say? We're overachievers. The mechanical fish suddenly came back to life, making frantic dolphin sounds. I must consult with the High Council immediately. This is unprecedented. Take your time, Dr. Vasquez said sweetly. We'll just be here working on our application portfolio. Murphy, should we include the file on how we ended our last world war? Which one? Murphy asked innocently. The one where we convinced 2 superpowers to stop fighting by threatening to blow up the moon. Oh, that one. Definitely include that. Show's initiative. Zothuk was already backing toward the door, his tentacles wrapped around the mechanical fish like a security blanket. 72 hours, he stammered. You still have 72 hours to think about this. As the door closed behind him, Murphy turned to Dr. Vasquez. Think it worked? She was practically bouncing in her chair. Oh, it worked. Did you see how his chromatophores shifted when you mentioned the atomic weapons? He's about to have the alien equivalent of a panic attack. Murphy grinned. Phase 1 complete. Now we wait for them to call back. Think they will? Alina, we just turned a threat into a job interview. Of course they're going to call back. They're probably too confused not to. Meanwhile, approximately 47 light-years away, the Galactic Council's emergency session was going about as well as you'd expect when you tell a bunch of bureaucrats that their foolproof intimidation strategy had just backfired spectacularly. High Councilor Blix stood at the center of the circular chamber, his crystalline form pulsing with colors that would have been pretty if they weren't indicating severe psychological distress. Around him, representatives from 47 different species were making the kinds of noises their species made when reality stopped making sense. Let me understand this correctly, Blix said, his voice resonating through the chamber's translation system with the tone of someone trying very hard not to have a complete breakdown. Ambassador Zlothuk delivered our standard ultimatum to the humans, and they thanked us. Zlothuk, still clutching his mechanical fish like an emotional support animal, nodded miserably. They were polite about it, sir. Disturbingly polite. Advisor Quen, whose species evolved from something that looked like a paranoid lobster, scuttled forward on his 8 legs. This is obviously a trap. No species responds to annihilation threats with gratitude. It's unnatural, it's wrong, it's probably illegal under 17 different galactic codes. They asked to join the council, Zlothuk added weakly. The chamber erupted in what could charitably be called discussion, but sounded more like someone had dumped a zoo into a blender. Councillor Vrix, who resembled a floating jellyfish with authority issues, pulsed an agitated shade of orange. Join the council. They're barely past their primitive phase. They still use fossil fuels and reality television. About that, Zlothuk said, consulting his notes with the expression of someone reading their own obituary. They mentioned some things during our meeting that suggest our intelligence reports might be incomplete. High Councilor Blix's crystalline structure dimmed. What kind of things? Well, they claim their primitive weapons can split atoms for recreational purposes. The chamber went quiet except for the soft humming of life support systems and what sounded like someone hyperventilating through gills. Recreational purposes, Blix repeated slowly. Yes, sir. They also mentioned something about dissolving most known materials and putting warheads through windows from halfway around their planet. Oh, and they've apparently been monitoring our communications for months. Advisor Quen's 8 legs started clicking against the floor in rapid succession. Monitoring our communications. How? Our encryption protocols are military grade. They haven't even achieved faster than light travel. That's another thing, sir. Their scientist, Dr. Vasquez, seemed to know quite a bit about our fleet's crystalline matrix systems. She mentioned something about radio frequencies that could destabilize them. If the chamber had been quiet before, it was now approaching the kind of silence usually reserved for funerals and tax audits. Counselor Teff, whose species looked like someone had crossed a spider with a filing cabinet, spoke up in a voice that sounded like paper shredding. Did anyone bother to check what these humans do for entertainment? Zlothuk consulted his tablet, his tentacles trembling slightly. Let me see. They have something called extreme sports where they voluntarily throw themselves out of aircraft for fun. They've created competitions around hitting each other with various objects. They've built machines designed specifically to make them experience terror, which they call roller coasters and pay money to ride. What about their historical conflicts? Teff pressed. Well, they've had 2 major planetary wars within the last century, numerous smaller conflicts, and something called nuclear weapons testing where they apparently detonated over 2,000 experimental devices on their own planet just to see what would happen. Advisor Quen was now making a high-pitched whining sound. They tested nuclear weapons on their own planet, for science. Gets better, Zlothuk said, his voice cracking slightly. They've sent members of their own species to other celestial bodies using controlled explosions. They've built space stations, robotic explorers, and something called the Internet, which appears to be a global communication network they use primarily for sharing pictures of small furry animals and arguing about everything. High Counselor Blix sat down heavily, his crystalline form flickering between colors like a broken mood ring. So let me summarize. We threaten to annihilate a species that splits atoms for fun, has weaponized their entire planet, treats mortal danger as entertainment, and has been secretly monitoring our secures communications while pretending to be primitive. That's about the size of it, sir. And instead of surrendering or attacking, they thanked us and asked for jobs. They seemed particularly interested in conflict resolution positions. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Finally, Counselor Vrix pulsed a defeated shade of blue. What exactly do we do now? High Counselor Blix looked around at the assembled representatives of 47 civilizations, all of whom were staring at him with the expectant expressions of people who really hoped someone else had a plan. I think, he said slowly, we need to have another conversation with the humans. A much more careful conversation. Advisor Quen's legs were clicking so rapidly they sounded like typewriter keys. What if they say no to our new proposal? Then we find out what happens when you upset a species that considers nuclear warfare a hobby. The translation system helpfully rendered the sound Zlothuk made as the noise of existential dread given form. 18 hours later, Murphy was back in conference room B. But this time the dynamic had shifted considerably. Instead of one nervous ambassador with a mechanical fish, Earth now had a full diplomatic contingent via hologram. High Counselor Blix's crystalline form flickered slightly in the projection, while Advisor Quen's 8 legs tapped an anxious rhythm that sounded like Morse code for "Please don't hurt us." Murphy sat casually in his chair, a sandwich in one hand and a coffee in the other, because nothing said "I'm not impressed by your galactic authority," quite like eating lunch during negotiations that could determine the fate of humanity. So Murphy said, taking a bite of his turkey club, I take it you've had some time to think about our application. High Counselor Blix's crystalline structure pulsed an uncomfortable shade of yellow. Commander Murphy, we may have been hasty in our initial assessment of Earth's development level. You think? Dr. Vasquez interjected from her seat beside Murphy. She'd brought her own lunch, which appeared to be a salad and what looked suspiciously like alien communication transcripts she was using as reading material. Because your intelligence reports were adorably incomplete. Advisor Quen's legs clicked faster. We've reviewed our data and discovered certain gaps in our surveillance. Murphy nodded thoughtfully while chewing. Gaps. Like how you missed that we've been tracking your scout ships for the past 8 months. Or how you didn't notice that we reverse-engineered your basic propulsion systems from the debris field you left in the Kuiper Belt. The holographic aliens exchanged what could only be described as "oh crap" looks. The debris field, Blix said weakly. From that little fender bender your survey team had with an asteroid. Dr. Vasquez explained cheerfully. We sent a cleanup crew. Very educational. Your technology is quite elegant, by the way. We've already improved the efficiency by about 30%. Zalthok, who was sitting slightly behind the other council members, made a sound like a deflating balloon. Improved it. Oh yes, Murphy said, pulling out his phone and casually scrolling through some photos. Would you like to see what we did with your faster-than-light communication array? We integrated it with our global internet infrastructure. Now every human on the planet can send cat videos at superluminal speeds. The silence from the Galactic Council's side of the conversation was the kind of profound quiet usually reserved for libraries and crime scenes. Cat videos, Blix repeated, his crystalline form now pulsing a color that didn't translate well but seemed to convey deep existential confusion. Humans are very fond of small domesticated predators, Dr. Vasquez explained helpfully. We have approximately 4 billion hours of video documentation of their activities. Would you like to see some? They're quite entertaining. That's not why we're here. Advisor Quen managed, his voice sounding like someone was strangling a mechanical keyboard. Murphy set down his sandwich and looked directly at the holographic projection. Right. You're here because you realized that threatening us was roughly equivalent to poking a sleeping bear with a stick made of fireworks. We prefer to think of it as a diplomatic miscalculation, Blix said carefully. Uh-huh. Murphy leaned back in his chair. So what's your new offer? The council members huddled together for a moment, whispering in what sounded like a combination of dolphin clicks, wind chimes, and someone trying to start a reluctant lawnmower. Finally Blix straightened up. The Galactic Council would like to formally invite Earth to join as a consulting member. Consulting member, Murphy repeated. And what exactly would we be consulting on? Conflict resolution, Quen said quickly. Peaceful negotiation strategies, cultural exchange programs. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her transcripts. You mean you want us to solve problems for you? We prefer to think of it as collaborative problem solving, Blix said. Murphy grinned. What kind of problems? The council members exchanged another round of looks. Finally Zalthok cleared his throat, or made whatever sound his species used to indicate throat clearing. Well, there's the ongoing territorial dispute between the Vraxian Empire and the Stellar Collective. They've been fighting over mining rights in the Andromeda sector for about 300 years. 300 years? Murphy raised an eyebrow. Over mining rights. It's complicated. I bet. What else? Advisor Quen's legs were now tapping out what sounded like the theme from Jeopardy! The Zephyrian Trade Alliance has been boycotting the Cosmic Commerce Council over a disagreement about tariff regulations on imported exotic matter. How long has that been going on? Roughly 500 years. Dr. Vasquez snorted. You people really commit to your grudges, don't you? There's also the situation with the Nebular Confederation, Blix added reluctantly. They've declared war on the concept of mathematics itself and refuse to participate in any galactic activities that involve numbers. Murphy paused with his coffee cup halfway to his lips. They declared war on math. It's a philosophical stance. Very passionate about it. Right. Murphy set down his cup and looked around the room. So let me get this straight. You've got a galactic civilization that's been stuck on the same 3 problems for centuries, and you want to bring in the species that solved their last major ideological conflict, by convincing both sides that the real enemy was nuclear winter. That's one way to put it. Murphy stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the New York skyline where humans were going about their daily business of turning chaos into somehow functional civilization. What's the pay? He asked. The question seemed to catch the council off guard. Blix's crystalline form flickered several colors in rapid succession. Pay. Salary, benefits, vacation time. Do you have a good dental plan? Dr. Vasquez grinned. Jake's very practical about these things. We hadn't considered monetary compensation, Quen admitted. Murphy turned back to face the hologram. Well, you should, because if you want Earth's help solving problems that have stumped 47 civilizations for centuries, it's going to cost you. What do you want? Blix asked. And there was something almost desperate in his translated voice. Murphy sat back down and picked up his sandwich. Full council membership, voting rights, access to your technology databases, and most importantly, we want you to officially recognize that Earth specializes in what we call impossible solutions. Impossible solutions, the kind of problems that can't be solved by committees, bureaucracy, or waiting 300 years for someone else to blink first. The council members huddled together again, this time with more urgent whispering that sounded like a combination of panic and resignation. Finally High Counselor Blix straightened up, his crystalline form settling into a resigned shade of blue-green. Very well, Commander Murphy. Welcome to the Galactic Council. Murphy raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. Pleasure doing business with you. Now about that math war. 6 months later, Murphy stood in what used to be Conference Room B, but was now officially designated as Earth's Galactic Relations Office. The room had been upgraded with alien holographic equipment, a universal translator that worked better than most human customer service representatives, and a coffee machine that could brew beverages from 17 different star systems. The coffee from Rigel 7 tasted like chocolate and regret, but it kept you awake for 3 days straight. The wall behind Murphy's desk was covered with what looked like the galaxy's most bizarre collection of participation trophies, except each one represented a supposedly impossible diplomatic solution. There was the crystalline peace treaty from the Vraxian stellar collective conflict, which had been resolved when Murphy suggested they just share the mining rights and use the profits to build a really nice space casino. The Zephyrian Trade Alliance boycott had ended after Dr. Vasquez convinced both sides that their 500-year dispute had actually been caused by a clerical error in the original tariff documents. And then there was Murphy's personal favorite, a small, elegant sculpture that represented the end of the Nebular Confederation's war against mathematics. It turned out they weren't actually opposed to math itself, just incredibly bad at it. Earth had solved that problem by offering to handle all their calculations in exchange for access to their surprisingly advanced art and poetry databases. Commander Murphy came a familiar voice through the communications array. High Counselor Blix's holographic form materialized in the center of the room, looking significantly more relaxed than he had 6 months ago. His crystalline structure now pulsed a steady, comfortable green, that the translator helpfully identified as grateful but slightly embarrassed. Blix, Murphy said, not looking up from the report he was reading. Please tell me the Andromedans haven't declared war on gravity again. No, nothing like that. Although they did send a formal complaint about your solution to their atmospheric processor dispute. What's wrong with my solution? They claim it's too effective. Their air is now cleaner than it's been in 1,000 years, and they're not sure what to do with all the free time they used to spend on environmental committees. Murphy finally looked up. That's their complaint. That the problem is too solved. Essentially, yes. They've asked if you could make it slightly less efficient, so they have something to manage. Dr. Vasquez's voice drifted from the adjoining lab, where she was apparently having an animated discussion with what sounded like a sentient plant about quantum mechanics. Tell them we'll add a monthly calibration requirement. Gives them something to feel important about, without actually breaking anything. Brilliant as always, Elena, Murphy called back, then turned his attention back to Blix. What else is on the agenda today? Blix's form flickered slightly, which Murphy had learned was the alien equivalent of shuffling papers nervously. Well, there's a new situation that's just come to our attention. The Galactic Council has been contacted by another alliance of species. They call themselves the Universal Federation, and they're demanding that we surrender our territories to them. Murphy set down his report and gave Blix his full attention. Another galactic government. Apparently they've been expanding through this sector for the past several millennia, absorbing other civilizations through a combination of superior technology and intimidation tactics. They've sent us a formal ultimatum. Let me guess. Surrender or face total annihilation. How did you know? Murphy leaned back in his chair and grinned. Lucky guess. So what's their timeline? 72 hours. The silence that followed was broken only by Dr. Vasquez's delighted laughter from the next room. Elena, did you catch that? Murphy called. Every word, she replied. And Murphy could hear the excitement in her voice. Should I start preparing our standard thank you note template? Absolutely. But maybe jazz it up a bit this time. Add some references to our recent consulting work. Blix's crystalline form was now pulsing rapidly between several different colors, none of which translated to anything particularly coherent. Commander Murphy, surely you're not suggesting we use the same strategy that worked on us. Why not? It worked beautifully. But the Universal Federation has conquered dozens of galactic civilizations. They have advanced weaponry, vast fleets, and a track record of success spanning thousands of years. Murphy stood up and walked over to the trophy wall, running his finger along the edge of the Nebular Confederation's Mathematics Peace Prize. Blix, let me ask you something. 6 months ago, how long had your territorial disputes been going on? Centuries. And how long did it take us to solve them? About 3 weeks on average. Now, do you think this Universal Federation has ever encountered a species that responds to ultimatums by saying thank you and asking for career advice? The hologram flickered as Blix considered this. Probably not. Do you think they've ever had to deal with a civilization that treats interstellar threats as networking opportunities? Almost certainly not. Murphy turned back to face the projection. Then I'd say they're about to get a very educational experience. Dr. Vasquez appeared in the doorway, holding a tablet and wearing the kind of smile that usually preceded either groundbreaking scientific discoveries or elaborate practical jokes. I've been monitoring their communication frequencies while you two were talking. Their technology is actually quite impressive, but they have the same fundamental flaw as most advanced civilizations, which is, they think logically. Their entire strategy is based on the assumption that threatened species will respond with either fear or aggression. They've probably never encountered a civilization that responds with curiosity and job applications. Blix's colors were now cycling through what Murphy had learned to recognize as the alien equivalent of nervous excitement. So you think your approach will work on them too? Blix, Murphy said, settling back into his chair. 6 months ago you thought humans were a primitive species that needed to be either conquered or destroyed. Now we're the Galactic Council's chief problem solvers. We've ended conflicts that predated human civilization, and we've got a waiting list of species who want our help with their impossible situations. That's true. The Universal Federation is about to learn the same lesson you did, the hard way. Dr. Vasquez held up her tablet. Plus, I've already identified 3 major vulnerabilities in their fleet configuration, and at least 2 ways to disable their primary weapons systems using techniques we developed from studying their own communication protocols. You got all that from monitoring their frequencies, Jake. They're broadcasting on 17 different channels simultaneously, and none of them are encrypted. It's like they're not even trying to be subtle. Murphy shook his head. Amateurs. All right, Blix. Here's what we're going to do. First we send them our standard thank you note, but this time we include our resume of recent galactic consulting work. And then we wait for them to call back in a panic, just like you did. Blix's crystalline form settled into a steady, amused blue. And if they don't respond the same way we did? Murphy grinned and gestured toward the wall of diplomatic trophies. Then they'll find out why everyone in this sector now comes to Earth, when they have problems that can't be solved by conventional thinking. Dr. Vasquez laughed. Besides, we've been getting a little bored lately. All these successful negotiations are making us soft. We could use a new challenge. Speak for yourself, Murphy said. I was just starting to enjoy having galactic neighbors who don't immediately try to blow us up. Where's the fun in that? High Counselor Blix watched this exchange with the kind of fascination usually reserved for observing exotic wildlife. After 6 months of working with humans, he was still amazed by their ability to treat existential threats as minor inconveniences and impossible problems as interesting puzzles. Commander Murphy, he said finally, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I'd like to officially state that we're very glad we decided not to annihilate your planet. Murphy raised his coffee cup. Best decision you ever made, Blix. Now, let's go welcome our new neighbors to the galaxy. I have a feeling they're going to fit right in. Through the window, Earth continued its orbit around the sun, blissfully unaware that its status had just changed from recently discovered primitive worlds to the place other civilizations call when they need the impossible to become routine. And somewhere in space, the Universal Federation was about to receive the most polite, most grateful, and most psychologically devastating thank you note in galactic history. Murphy couldn't wait to see how they'd handle it.